Well, now, one thing we like to do at the Clare Luce Policy Institute is take a moment to recognize effective leaders who speak up boldly, as Clare Luce did, on behalf of conservative principles and traditional values. Before she speaks to you today, I'm going to be presenting Katie Pavlich with our 2013 Conservative Leadership Award. Now, each year we select a woman for this award who's shown exceptional leadership in promoting conservative values. This year, there was no question that Katie Pavlich was the right choice for this award. At the Clare Luce Policy Institute, we've sponsored Katie at different events and on campuses, and she's in our Great American Conservative Women calendar. And she's quickly become one of the most prominent conservative women and leaders to boldly speak out against the policy failures of the Obama administration and his liberal allies around the country. Katie is the news editor for townhall.com and a contributing editor to Town Hall magazine. She's also the author of a terrific book, New York Times bestseller, Fast and Furious, Barack Obama's Bloodiest Scandal and its Shameless Cover Up. What a great book this is. This is still widely read, because we don't have a lot of answers to this scandal, do we, Katie? She's got a new book titled Toxic, the Bad Romance Between Liberals and Women, and that's going to be out this coming summer. As a journalist in DC, she's covered everything from White House scandals to border security and Second Amendment issues. She's been featured multiple media. I usually see you on Fox News, but she's also been on MSNBC, Fox Business, CNN, and many, many local and national radio shows. She's a graduate of the University of Arizona, where she studied broadcast journalism. She's currently a National Review Washington Fellow. And I read in one of your bios about that she has a love of the outdoors, and her respect for firearms is rooted in her experiences growing up in the mountains of northern Arizona, rafting the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon, and hunting big game with her father in the forests and deserts of the West. Now, despite her leadership and her achievements, you won't find conservative women like Katie Pavlich praised in the mainstream press or by any of the so-called women's groups. In fact, many of the liberals in the media and on college campuses really wish they could just silence conservative messengers like Katie. But at the Clare Luce Policy Institute, we are eager to honor leaders like Katie. And we want to thank you for your courage and determination in promoting our shared conservative values and for speaking out against the left's corrupt, big government socialist policies. The truth is, Katie, that you inspire many conservatives, and I'm sure many of the people in this room, to be more courageous and feisty in defending and promoting our beliefs. So we want to recognize you today as a leader like Clare Luce, who was principled and persuasive. It's our honor now to present you with the 2013 Clare Luce Policy Institute Conservative Leadership Award.
Dedicated years of her life to promoting conservative values, to fighting the fight on college campuses where we really need to win. Her experience is something to be looked up to, and her hard work and perseverance and dedication to the cause is something that I deeply respect and definitely want to emulate as the years go on. She's definitely helped a lot of young women's dreams come true, but she's also helped the men. So we like the Clare Luce Policy Institute. I'm going to keep this talk pretty formal, maybe in more of a conversation. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. People ask me, where do I get my personality? Where do I get what I believe in? And I say it goes way back to my genetics. I'm a daughter of the American Revolution, so that tells you a lot about how I feel when it comes to burdensome government. I'm Irish, which is where I get my fighting side. I'm German, which is where I get my get-it-done side. I'm Australian, which is where I think I get my little bit of trouble side from, causing some trouble, and I'm Croatian, which is where I get my liberty side from. As she mentioned, I grew up in Arizona, 5 acres of land on a dirt road, and we hauled our own water, cut our own wood, didn't have cable till I was, I think, 13 years old. And, growing up in my family background, I was always taught to work hard. My great uncle, survived the Great Depression, and my great-great-grandmother who came here in the early 1900s from Croatia would rewash her saran wrap because that's just the way they did it. So that's what kind of the values that I learned when I was growing up. And by the time I was 6 years old, 7 years old, it was very clear that my parents had been talking about politics at the kitchen table because I started writing letters to Bill Clinton about tax policy. And I would tell him in these letters, where I'm sure the handwriting was horrible, that it was unfair that he was spending our money and that we didn't get to spend his money. And I actually did get a response from him, and of course it was this form letter of why, rich people need to pay more and blah, blah. I think I still have that somewhere in one of my boxes. So as I got older, I was still writing letters to politicians, but I really got my first taste of leftist indoctrination in the education system when I was in high school. And I was in this rhetoric class, debate class, and I had the student teacher who was there from the local university in Flagstaff, Arizona, Northern Arizona University, and it was diversity day. So she came in, wearing all these diverse clothes, and she handed out a sheet of paper with all these statistics on it. And basically what this sheet of paper said was it was all about how if there was a village of 100 people, so many people would be black, so many people would be white, so many people would be poor, so many people would be rich. And then the other side was all about how much money the United States spends on the military, when if we spent that money feeding the poor around the world, we would be better off as a society. And so the only thing I did was raise my hand. I was 15, and I asked, well, I just don't understand why you aren't showing the other side. The only question I asked, which turned into an hour-long screaming fest between myself and the student teacher, with the actual teacher sitting on the sideline watching and not intervening at all. So we're going back and forth, and the end of the conversation ends with this student teacher telling me if I don't want to educate myself, she can't help me. And so then I brought up the fact that, well, I think I have a little bit of an education. My family in Croatia survived the war in the 1990s. They lived as refugees for 5 years. Their home was burned down by communists. I think I understand a little bit about the world, but thanks. And then my regular teacher chimed in and said, well, if you have a counter-argument to what was on this sheet of paper, which didn't have proper citing, by the way, you couldn't find where these statistics came from, then you are more than welcome to go home and research it and come back tomorrow with your argument. So I went home, and Google was still pretty new, but I Googled some stuff and came up with a packet this thick full of great things about how we were helping women in Afghanistan get out from under the horrors of the Taliban and all these things. And I handed it to my teacher the next day, and he joked with me because he thought it was funny and said, "Oh, well, you must not have a life," because I had gone home and actually researched this. And I responded by saying, "That took me about 10 minutes. It wasn't fun." And so, that day when I was done with that class, I got in the car, and I remember I was getting my driver's license, and so I was really upset. My dad wouldn't let me drive home. He's like, "Just sit in the seat, we'll handle this." So that was really my first run-in. And I had a lot of students who came up to me afterwards and said, "Thank you so much for saying something." And that was when we were 15-year-olds, right? And so, from that point forward, I was kind of a political nerd. There was this superintendent in the school system who had lost $2 million randomly, said he didn't know where it was. So then my mother, of course, being who she is, read the recall effort against him and won. And I remember going to one of these meetings for his recall and speaking of, about how it wasn't fair that he was in this position of power and took all of the money when they're complaining about students not having textbooks for their classrooms. So I went to city council meetings, went to all these things, I went to law camp at Stanford, and that was awesome. And then I had another run in there because I had another student teacher who was a law student who randomly asked us if we thought by law parents should be required to tell other parents if there's a gun in their home. And I responded by saying, you know, I have a gun with my name on it. My dad got it for me when I was 10, yeah. You know, and she couldn't respond to that because she thought that she was in a place where she could just tell people what to think and what to write. I said, I don't think that's something that we should really be doing at all. And I just told her I had my own, and she didn't really have much of a response. When I went to college, I went to the University of Arizona, which made David Horowitz's book of the 7 worst universities you can go to in terms of liberal policies. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was kind of one of those people who went to college just because that's what you do after high school, right? Everyone's supposed to go to college. Went to college, you know, dabbled in business a little bit, didn't really like it, was in political science, and all of a sudden I was like, oh, I love basketball. I'll be a sports journalist, you know. So I did a little bit of that, but then I really realized that it clicked. You know, I should be doing political journalism, I should be in politics. And then right away, it just kind of took off from there. I did an internship with Senator John Kyle when TARP passed. That was a great experience, lots of angry phone calls about that. Had to live through, you know, Barack Obama's inauguration with the university shutting down every single class that we were paying for so we could all go watch the inauguration. You know, fighting with liberal professors on a regular basis in my journalism classes. And then I really got involved with the local TV station, which at the time was this kind of boring, entertainment-style TV station. And we decided to develop a political segment and update students on what was happening in Tucson, at the very local level, in the state of Arizona, and at the national level politically. And it was a very short 2-minute weekly recap. It was probably really bad. I kind of cringed thinking of going and YouTubing those because I'm sure the production value was horrible. But that was something that we did to kind of get students more involved in politics and getting them interested in what happens to them when their tuition goes up, or the debate that's happening with the sales tax to pay for programs at the university, whether the university was spending that money wisely. And so once that was over, I was facing my senior year of college. I'm a big believer in internships and real-world experience when it comes to getting a job and employers wanting to hire you. And there wasn't that much available in Tucson for me to do. I could have done a local newspaper internship, I could have worked at a television station, but I just really didn't feel like I would get the skill set that I wanted. So I applied for my internship at townhall.com, got in barely, and moved to Washington, D.C. for the summer. I lived in a 1-bedroom dorm room with 3 other girls for the summer, and just worked really hard and did as much as I could, went to every single meeting or think tank event that I possibly could, and that really led the way for me to continue working when I went back to school in Arizona, which served as a blessing because that year John McCain was running for re-election in the Senate, so I was able to go to some of his events and cover them for the site. And then the next year when I graduated, throughout that year, let me backtrack a little bit, on the media side, I started going on a local radio show every single week for an hour to describe what was happening inside my classroom. So what professors were saying, what the university was spending money on. So when my professor said that China wasn't a communist country, I would then go on the radio and discuss what these professors were saying in the classroom, because we hear a lot about university indoctrination, but nobody really gets to hear it from the students from the inside. So I decided I was going to do it. I think my parents were very afraid I wasn't going to get my diploma, but I did. And, and that was just a really good way for the community to really see how young people were being treated at the university level and what people were actually learning. And my first big national story that I got for town hall, and this was before I was even hired full-time. For our graduation ceremony, I still remember her name. Her name was Sandra Soto. She was a professor of LGBTQ studies, women's studies, and she was giving the commencement address for the College of Social and Behavioral Sciences, which was my political science minor, and also what was the overbranch of the journalism program. And SB 1070, is anyone familiar with that law? Basically the law in Arizona that they passed that requires police officers to ask you if you're a citizen or not if you commit a crime. She got up at this commencement ceremony and used that as her own personal soapbox, not to thank the students for working hard for 4 years, not to thank the parents who had flown in for miles or driven for hours to the university to see their children graduate and go into adulthood. She spent 30 minutes talking about how Arizona was racist and how this law needed to be fought and combated, to the point where the entire arena was booing her. And the dean of the college had the nerve to get up and tell the parents that they needed to be civil. And so I was sitting, close to my brother who was up in the stand and said, turn your camera on, turn your camera on. And he turned his camera on, got the speech, and a day later it was all over every single Fox News show, it was all over talk radio, it was this huge deal because it was a combination between commencement and SB 1070. And she got called out for that. Of course the university didn't punish her for it, but it was something that at least people saw what was going on. And it was just really unfortunate that she would take this situation of people graduating and celebrating themselves and moving on in the world to, she really stole that from the students, but it was nice to know that she at least was publicly shamed for it. I'm a fan of public shaming, by the way. So when I moved to Washington, D.C., I was definitely a rookie. I'd been here the summer before. Moved all by myself, decided to live alone, be a big girl, and I really worked behind the scenes doing a lot of administrative work for about 6 months before I decided, you know what, I want to do some more. And before I started really making my way up to Capitol Hill. And what really got me interested and really, kicked things off was, I did a couple things. I did a couple, State of the Union addresses, and Benjamin Netanyahu came to speak, and that was one of my favorite things I got to cover. I got to sit in the chamber and listen to that and write notes. And it was great. I framed it to get a ticket to get in, so I framed the ticket and it's on my desk. But obviously the story that really affected me the most and I was most passionate about was the Fast and Furious scandal. And when I started hearing about this, the story that Bloodiest broke, I was thinking, why in the world would our own government be sending guns to the most ruthless criminals in North America, if not some of the worst in the world? I'm being from Arizona, I understand how the border works, I understand that it's open, I know a lot of people in law enforcement. And I really just, dug in and got started and was covering that story almost every day for 6 months, which it was such a big story, and in the 24/7 news cycle, a headline today is gone in the next 5 minutes, right? Something that happened yesterday is probably not going to be that effective today, which I think the combination of big government and the 24/7 cycle really lets politicians and their cronies get away with a lot because people's attention spans are so short. They can't remember all the details. And as Cleta mentioned, scandal overload. So the book came about because it was such a big scandal. There were so many different players. Everything needed to be tied together in one thing for people to know about it. And it was, of course, something that the majority of the mainstream media, besides CBS's Cheryl Atkinson, who was definitely a standout, wouldn't cover it, wouldn't talk about it. Didn't want to discuss the fact that the Attorney General had probably committed perjury, changed his testimony under oath a million times. Not to mention the fact that the media had been demonizing gun dealerships, accusing them of sending guns to Mexico when really it was the government telling them to do it. And the media really holding them accountable for the violence, mayhem, and murder down south of the border when they weren't willing to touch this other story of this was all concocted by our very own Justice Department. And so the book came out of that, and it was just another way to get the story into another form of media. What I love about my job is I get to do all different forms of media, which is where media is going: TV, radio, online, print. We have a magazine at Town Hall that we do more investigative pieces for every single month. Video, photography. You have to know how to do everything, but it's really fun because you can tell a story in so many different ways. And so, you get the question a lot: why do you want to be a journalist? It seems like a tough job. When my book came out, the Department of Justice partnered with Media Matters, which is funded by George Soros, to smear me, and there's emails with the correspondence between the Justice Department and Media Matters talking about it. So when the administration, thinks that journalists are criminals, they actually mean it, and they work with other organizations on the taxpayer's dime to smear people who expose their scandals. But the reason I do what I do is because, especially after this week, I don't think that the murders of U.S. Ambassador Chris Stevens or Glenn Doherty or Sean Smith or Tyrone Woods or Brian Terry or Jaime Zapata are phony. And what I think is phony is Hillary Clinton standing in front of flag-draped coffins and lying about a YouTube video to save her career and to save her own legacy. That's what's phony. I think their lives have made a difference, and I think that it's important, despite what the president thinks. When Attorney General Eric Holder says that more people are going to die as a result of his own department's program of sending thousands of guns to cartel members who, leave headless, feetless handless bodies on the side of the road to make a point, who killed chiefs of police, they killed teachers, they have no respect for the rule of law, not to mention the open border. That's not good enough for me, for him to say, well, yeah, more people will die. I've been helping, civil and criminal contempt of Congress, but I don't respect the congressman who put me there. That's not good enough. It's not okay. If any one of you guys would have sold guns to one cartel member on purpose, you would be in jail for the rest of your life. But apparently the Justice Department doing it 2,000 plus times doesn't really matter. I think it's interesting how, we have an obligation when someone like Barack Obama has the time to call birth control moocher Sandra Fluke and infanticide proponent Wendy Davis and the first openly gay NBA player. When he has time to call those people but doesn't have time to call the family of Chris Kyle, who was former Navy SEAL, #1 sniper in history, saved numerous lives in our military fighting for our freedom, we have a duty to call that out and say, where are your priorities as a leader of the free world? Right? I think it's important for him to know that. It's important to say, we know you don't get your news from the newspaper, so why don't you just cut the crap, And besides, no one's reading newspapers anymore, so you probably should have said online. And the other huge thing too for me being in the media is that there are always these false narratives, whether it's gun control and the latest thing, and then the 2012 election was all about the war on women, right? And I was at the DNC last fall, which was horrible. But I was sitting there for hours and for days, listening to speeches over and over again from people hammering away and screeching about the war on women. And I'm sitting there, it was like 9 o'clock at night, prime time, MSNBC's covering it, wall-to-wall coverage. And all of a sudden, this 5-minute tribute video to Ted Kennedy comes up on the screen. And I'm thinking, this can't be real. The guy who left a woman to drown and die in his car is being glorified at a convention that claims to be fighting the war on women, but Republicans are the bad guys. Okay, got it. So sitting there that night, I was booked on Piers Morgan's show. And I was thinking, I hope he brings it up, because I'm going to say it. I'm going to say it. And so, I was in the green room, Piers Morgan's interviewing a Kennedy, they're gushing over this video, don't you miss Ted Kennedy? And I'm just sitting there trying to throw up or pass out before I get on air. And I get on air, and it's myself, Richard Grinnell, who's a conservative, Hillary Rosen, who was a woman who attacked Ann Romney for being a stay-at-home mother, and Van Jones, who is a self-avowed communist, and Piers Morgan, who, I don't even know what he is, but he has his own category. And they're all talking, and suddenly the conversation shifts to Mitt Romney. And Piers Morgan takes the time to say, weren't you uncomfortable, because Mitt Romney was shown in this video as being pro-choice, weren't you uncomfortable with the fact that Mitt Romney was talking about being pro-choice in that video? And I just turned to him and said, Piers, you know what? You know what makes me uncomfortable is that at a convention that claims to be fighting the war on women, that you would glorify a man who left a woman to die in his car. And the panel exploded. Piers said I was a below-the-belt comment. Hillary Rosen cut me off right away, because of course she has to defend her Democratic men. And then during the break, she turned to me and said, I think what you said is disgusting. To which I said, Hillary, I think what he did was disgusting. So, combating that kind of narrative is really important. And people will call you extreme. The producer called me and said, you probably could have said that in a little different way. It's like, really? Could you explain to me, how leaving a woman to drown for 9 hours is explainable in a different way? And so, fighting that narrative is really important. And, when I was growing up, one of my heroes was Dana Perino. I wanted to be a White House secretary. I loved her. And it's just amazing that, 3 weeks ago I was filling in for her on the 5. It was like a dream come true, So if you work hard and you do good things, you take advantage of all these opportunities that are handed to you, you can make a huge difference. And I think, I'm going to criticize the conservative movement a little bit, because I think that they sell themselves short when they don't take advantage of young people. I think they forget that Bill Buckley was 27 when he wrote God, a Man at Yale. They forget that he was 30 years old when he founded National Review. I think conservatives just feel like the young generation is lost and just get them when they're older, but they're missing a huge opportunity there. Because there's a whole list of people. Lila Rose, with Live Action. We have Students for Life who won in Texas. It was all young people protesting for life in Texas. You have Lisa Daftari, who's a Fox News contributor who does a ton of analysis for Middle Eastern studies and on Iran. And she's not even 30 yet, and she came out of college, and all these people were activists on their campuses by holding events, by combating the narrative. You have Amanda Collins in the back who tells her story about what happened to her on a college campus, and she goes around and she says, you're not going to turn anyone into a victim. Speaking out against that kind of behavior and people putting you in a certain box is really important, and you can do it because young people have floated the conservative movement to where it is now, and they're going to continue to do it in the future. So just a couple tips before I take your questions about how you can get there. Obviously work hard, be perseverant. The first time on Fox News came because I bought Greg Gutfeld a beer after he was complaining about how long the line was. And because he's short and I'm tall, I just cut the line, got him one, and then it was like, come on my show. So you have to just do things that might scare you. You have to take risks. Don't be too confrontational, but don't be afraid either. Judge what situations you think, choose your battles wisely. And do things that other people aren't doing. Be unique. Don't just do everything that everyone else is doing, or you're not going to stand out. And take on the big issues. Who would have thought that at 22 I could have been taking on the Justice Department and having their spokesperson emailing Media Matters because they thought I was a problem. That there was going to be an issue, that there was a book out on what they were doing. Age is just a number. And as long as you're passionate and you work hard and you surround yourself with the right people, the sky's the limit. And my last piece of advice is just run your own race. Surround yourself with people who can help you, but do things the way you want to, and you'll get there. So I'll take your questions. I can start calling on you, because I got 10 more minutes. So.
Hi Katie, I'm Andrea. I'm a Luce Policy Institute intern, and I go to the University of Illinois Springfield. And you were talking about how the conservative movement doesn't always utilize young people as well as it should. What can we as young people who want to make a difference? What can we do to kind of draw attention to what we have to offer to the conservative movement?
I don't want to be too general here, and I don't want to stereotype too much here, but I would say, don't put a barrier between yourself and the rest of the young people you're around. I think conservatives tend to have to close themselves off because they feel so isolated from the rest of their peers. But, understand that, look, we both like rock music, we both like heavy metal, we both like going to whatever on the weekends. Make those personal connections and humanize yourself, because a lot of the time what the left does, they demonize you to a point where you're no longer human. And they do that so that they can get away with attacking you in a very obscene way. So humanizing yourself, and then, kind of not making it so political right away. You can, add in things about taxes here and there, like, oh, well, I wish I could buy that, but, they took that out of my taxes last week. But then move on. Just like throw these little things out there. And in terms of holding events, be very inviting and very open. I think a lot of times in the conservative movement we don't want to invite the left in, which is understandable, but there are some people who are willing to be turned, especially young people, I think. There are some who won't be, but doing whatever you can to just kind of relate to them on a very personal level, and then make it personal for them. When it comes to student loans, when they start complaining about that, or other things, the cost of living, how much they're having taken out of their paycheck, and then just kind of tie that to how they vote. And I always tell people who tell me they don't like politics, well, you might not like politics, but politics likes you. And it's going to control your life whether you want it to or not. So you can either have a voice in the conversation, or you can sit back and let other people make those decisions for you. So that's a good way. Yes?
My name is Kira Seaman, and I'm also a Clare Boothe student. I just want to say it's really inspiring that you're at such a young age for doing so many things. And my question is, when it comes to the writing aspect of things, I'm trying to just get better at that. What's your advice on trying to make your writing known to people so they're wanting to have you write for them, or just being more noticed with them?
Well, I think practice is the best thing to do. So what I used to do, actually it's anymore because I write so much, but what I used to do is I would just carry around a little netbook when I couldn't afford an iPad, and I would write stuff down even if it would never get published, because writing is like a muscle. The more you do it, the better it is and the easier it is. So what you write might not get published, but when you get an opportunity to write something, your writing will be even better and there's a greater chance of it getting published. In terms of seeking out ways to get published, lots of people take column submissions. We do at our website. Do a lot of things for free at first, and eventually those opportunities for more will come.
Okay, so I'm Morgan, and I'm from Wisconsin, and I kind of have I'm looking for advice as to how to handle liberal bias in your university and maintain that balance. Everyone tells you when you're trying to get a job that your GPA matters, but then you have the idea, I had an international politics class, and former Senator Russ Feingold came in, and he spoke for 2 weeks. And he asked me specifically my opinion of his book, and I told him,
No pressure.
and I told him exactly how I felt in the middle of the class, and my grade went from an A- to a B- immediately. So, what kind of advice do you have about things like that?
It's so hard to give advice about that because I was always the person speaking out and getting in trouble. But it's unfortunate because they do use their position of power in that sense that they will punish you for what you say. But the good news is if you're going to the conservative movement, you can kind of explain that a little bit, you know? And if you do a bunch of work outside of school, that kind of balances out what happens in school, which is why I think internships are the best thing. I think there's a lot more emphasis on degrees from very liberal schools than there actually should be, because a lot of the degrees that people are getting really aren't worth that much when you actually go into the classroom and hear what they're telling you. If you get a political science degree and you look at the content you've been told for 4 years, probably not exactly what you were thinking of paying for, right? So, you know, choose your battles. I would say speak out, but that's just how I feel. I think that other people need a voice, and some people just have to take one for the team.
Yes.
Hi, Katie. Okay, thank you so much for being here. I just want to say that I think you're awesome.
Oh,
I think it's so good to have like a sassy conservative woman that can just take it and just fight right back. It's awesome. And I just want to know, will you be my friend? I'm just kidding.
Oh, sure.
Okay, my real question is, how do you stay strong when people are doing literally everything they can to just smear you? Because on my campus, like, obviously I get a lot of opposition and people saying things, and it can be discouraging, but I mean, you're just very firm in what you believe, and I'm going to have you deal with it.
I kind of just ignore it. I think that paying attention to constructive criticism is very important in terms of building your career and getting better at what you do. But the left is always going to hate you no matter what, even if you're nice to them. This is something Andrew Breitbart used to talk about all the time. You know, they will call you Nazis, they don't care, they will smear your reputation even when it's not true, all because they're so ingrained in their own political thought. And so, don't get discouraged, you're never going to impress them, and just keep doing what you're doing, and the reason why they're attacking you the way they are is because they know that you're right, and they see you as a threat. So, just ignore them, you know, and always just kill them with kindness, that's what I love to do. You know, one time I was in one of my journalism classes in college, and this was when John McCain was running with Sarah Palin for against Barack Obama, and of course, you know, Obama mania was going on inside my journalism school. So I'm thinking, oh, I'm going to balance this out a little bit. So my mother, who sends me t-shirts all the time, sent me a Sarah Palin Rosie the Riveter t-shirt, and I wore it to class. And the way that the table was set up was in kind of a U shape, so I sat at the very end, so my professor would have to see me the whole time. And by the end of the class, she's going, "Is that Sarah Palin?" Yeah, you've been talking about Barack Obama for 2 weeks. I just figured I'd balance out the conversation, you know. The great thing to do with the left, too, is hold them to their own standard. If they're asking you to be tolerant, ask them why they're not being tolerant towards you. Hold them to the same standard they expect you to have, and you'll win every single time. Yes?
Hi, I'm Luke Moraz. I'm an intern at Campaign for Liberty. What lesson do you think that Republicans can learn from conservative leaders such as Ron Paul, who are able to get such added and expansive views and support?
Well, Ron Paul's gone now, so I'm going to go with Rand Paul. I would say get out of the way. You know, the wacko bird comments need to go. John McCain has been in office for way too long.
Yes.
Way too long. Alan West is in the back. You know that he was a rabble-rouser in the House. Oh, yeah. You know, we need more people like him, and more people like Rand Paul, and more people like Ted Cruz. And, you know, I always say, you know, that conservative principles are winning when the Republicans are having a really hard time. When John McCain is cozying up to Barack Obama, while he's calling and worried about the younger kids on his front lawn, you're doing something right. And I do think there's something to be said about the old GOP having a real problem when it comes to youth voters because they're not open to younger ideas. They're not open to these ideas of liberty and Ron Paul's ideas and Rand Paul's ideas, and Ted Cruz had more new ideas. And so I think that they need to embrace the younger generation because they're doing a good job.
Thank you.
All right.